Welcome to episode number 30 of the On the Air podcast. So great to be joined by Tom Werme. Tom, thanks so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, Aiden.
It's we were talking about it. Syracuse guy. Is that where your love of broadcasting really began at a very young age?
I would say probably prior to that was when I was a kid in Massachusetts, and the Celtics were winning all their championships in the 80s. They won 3 of them, and Larry Bird was their star player. You might have heard of him. And so it was right then and there. It's like, well, if I can get involved in this somehow. And I was lucky enough to get into Syracuse, not in the broadcast journalism program right away, but I was able to get some decent grades and transfer within the university to Newhouse. Nothing wrong with any other school or college at our university, but Newhouse has produced some very talented people, and I might just be on the periphery of that group, but I was there in the early 90s with a very talented group, and I'm lucky enough to know a lot of them, and they've helped me along the way. So that network has really worked to my benefit over the years.
I love hearing the stories of the classes and the guys that were all grouped together. Who was in that group of 4 years that you were there? Who were some of the big names that walked through the school?
Yeah, like a couple years before me, guys like last names McDonough and Tirico, and one of my classmates was Ian Eagle. He was a year ahead of me. And a good friend of mine, Dave Ryan, who's worked for everybody, and Jason Knapp, who was a fraternity brother and is very successful as well, especially with his Olympic curling coverage. And Darren Horton was a classmate of mine. He works out on the West Coast now. That's just some names off the top of my head. There's a million other ones too. And we were lucky enough to have instructors and professors who brought in people like Bob Costas and Sean McDonough, and they were kind enough to get you at least pointed in the right direction, which is really all you need when you start. And if you want to keep the momentum going, it's on you from there. And here I am 30 years later. So still hanging on by my fingertips, but lucky enough to work for Raycom Sports and Fox Sports primarily. I've worked for the Big Ten Network, ESPN, and just hanging on and meeting the right people. It's really about relationships. And if you can establish the right ones and know that you're going to see the same people on the way up that you might see on the way down, and keep that kind of theory in your head, you should be okay. And the thing that I always say is, you hear throughout your life, you got to have a plan B. You got to be well-rounded and all that stuff. And that's true. But I think in TV, if you really want to go for it and stay in the business, I've gone without a plan B for a very long time. And I'm still kind of in it. That could change in the climate that we're in these days within a pandemic. That could change in a heartbeat. But for now, I work for great people. I work with great people. I mean, the names of the people that I work with are just off the charts good. I'm just happy to be sitting next to them most of the time for the game. So I've been very lucky in that regard. Can it all change in a moment? Absolutely. But I'm going to do everything I can to avoid that.
What is that like to go through your career with no plan B? Does that kind of force you to really put everything you have into whatever you happen to be doing, whether that was when you started out with local TV sports or now play-by-play?
Yeah. It's when I say plan B, I mean, like, if you want to go sell real estate and be a public relations person, that's great too. I mean, if you want to work anywhere, that's great. Embrace that. But I guess the well-roundedness comes from being able to maybe be a TV anchor and then be a play-by-play person, or be some kind of host, or just be versatile. I think that's very helpful when opportunities come along and you're ready for them, or at least you have an idea of how it works and you've got the background, or you can rely on other people who've done what you're about to do. Or it's very hard to do stuff if you don't have the experience, but then how do you get the experience? So it's a long, twisty road. But if you're willing to keep driving down it, you're going to go faster and slower at times. But if you're willing to keep going that way and embrace opportunities and try different things and work on your craft, and play-by-play to me is very artistic when it's done properly. And I certainly don't do it properly 100% of the time, but that's what I strive for. And I observe all my friends and colleagues in the business and try to uphold the standard that they set, which is very hard to do. But if you're always striving in that direction, you're going in a positive direction. So that's a good thing.
It's interesting that you talk about going kind of in a positive direction and how you feel like you want to put 100% into every broadcast, because I've heard from multiple sources that you're not big on listening back after a game, listening to the tape to critique yourself. What goes into that decision? Why don't you like to hear yourself after a game?
I listened to a little bit just to see how it sounded and how we meshed as far as myself and the analyst are concerned, and if we have a sideline person as well. I like to listen to critical parts in games where, how did you handle that big moment? There's two extremes. There's the big moment where you don't have to say a whole lot and you kind of disengage from sometimes the cumbersome numbers and everything to just embrace the moment. And then there's the games that the play going on is not really relevant. If we just did a game down in Miami where Georgia Tech led by 30 at halftime. So myself and Brian Oliver, who I get to work with, who was the MVP of the ACC tournament back in 1990 in Charlotte, right near where I live, for Georgia Tech, and Bobby Cremins is a great friend too, and I've gotten to work with him on air. I mean, I don't mean to name drop, and I don't mean to digress, but when I say those names out loud and say that I get to work with them and have worked with them and been aside of them, it's still hard for me to kind of digest. But I was working with Brian, and the entire second half was more of a bigger picture conversation. And that's hard to do too, to kind of moderate and frame that discussion and still keep it relevant and attach a common thread to it with the game that you're doing. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it, but I'll watch certain moments and that kind of thing, because it's very hard to be 100% on point all the time. We strive for that. We certainly do. But I enjoy seeing how I tried to handle those moments, and I kind of try to figure out what are the other options that I might have been able to do, and maybe employ those when I get a chance down the line. But I've done thousands and thousands of games, and I swear to you, I'll still, and I hope that people at the level that I'm at and beyond in the business can certainly relate to this, is that you're always extracting something where you learned something and you got better, or based on the situation you observed, you made an adjustment, or you thought about something in the future that you could do so you can get better as you continue to go. The perfect game is out there, but I'm still trying to find it, unlike Nolan Ryan. So, or, that kind of thing. So
what do you look for in a big call when you're getting one of those big calls? I know last year, I remember you had a great call with Virginia Tech and North Carolina football that went right down to the wire. You've had some pretty big calls and some pretty big games over the year. What do you look for in a call that really makes it stand out?
So that specifically, you're talking about the 6 overtime game, and it was the first time that college football had used the new rules about going for 2. And then it was only 2-point conversions after the 3rd overtime. So we're going back and forth, and you're trying to stay out of the way of it, but you still have to document it, because now it's getting very intricate with, like, what did they do on this possession and how many field goals have they missed or made or this or that. So I'm just kind of scribbling a little shorthand, but I'm honestly trying to stay out of the way. And I work with James Bates, who was on the national championship team for Florida back in '96 with Danny Werfel. And prior to that, I worked with Dave Archer, who played at Iowa State and is played in the NFL for the Falcons. So I work with very accomplished people. I'm lucky. But I try to stay out of their way and the game's way when it gets like that, and allow James to take me into, or Dave a few years ago, to take me into that moment and what the players are going through. Obviously, nobody had gone through any of that because it was the longest game in the history of the league. So, but I tried to stay out of the way of it. And at the end, I knew that when the game, once we got to overtime 3, 4, 5, 6, I knew I wanted to say something quickly and get out of the way and let my producer and director do their thing. And so in that moment, when Patterson, the third different quarterback, is another thing, like the layers of that game were just, Virginia Tech was on its third quarterback. They had scored they scored a touchdown in overtime on 4th down where the receiver reached back and made this one-handed, I mean, it was a cosmic collision of so many things. But I wanted to say something quickly out, so I said, once Patterson scored, 2-point conversion, I wanted to say the score. Virginia Tech wins by this score in 6 overtimes, way up here. And then I fell to my knees and I was hitting the tape because I couldn't believe what had just happened and it was over. And so James and I didn't speak for, I think it was 2.5 minutes. And we didn't even toss it down to our sideline reporter, Abby Labar. We just let Abby handle that. And so it's one of those moments where you want to punctuate it and then you want to get out of the way. And that's kind of the way it is with bigger moments like that. I've called some games at the Final Four that have been a lot of fun. And some games that we did a triple overtime game at Virginia Tech last year where Miami beat them. Just stuff that's coming to mind. In fact, last year, I think it was something like 15 overtime periods between football and basketball. So, you know, you get lucky sometimes, and sometimes the games are not compelling, but you're trying to make them interesting to the viewer with your conversation that you have going on. So there's a lot of extremes. There's a lot going on. I just want people to know that there's a lot of layers to any game. I don't care whether you're going to a high school game, college, pro, it doesn't matter. There's a lot of preparation and a lot of layers that go into it.
How do you remain dialed in a moment like that? I had a game, a basketball game on Tuesday that ended up going to overtime. They hit a buzzer beater in regulation. Our squad at home went to overtime. They lost. But how important is it for you to remain dialed in a moment like that? Because yes, you're not going to speak, but you also have to know we're going to cut it to the sideline reporter now, or we're going to bring up this graphic. How important is that?
I think the thing in those moments is to separate what's relevant and what's not. You really have to be in the moment many times to kind of sift through it and figure it out. But if there's gravity to the moment, and anytime you say the word overtime, there always is, but you need to give it just enough. What I like to say is that you kind of sprinkle stuff in, especially for a game on television, because it's on television and people can watch it. And then when you get to a critical moment like that, you need to know time and score, if it's basketball or football for that matter, timeouts, what the situation is. But at the same time, determine what's relevant and allow the pictures to speak for themselves. If you're doing a game on radio, you know, you're all they got. So you kind of have to continue to frame it that way. But TV, I think that silence, the announcer not talking, is way, way underrated. Kind of like listening is underrated, because people want to get their message out there and they want to talk. And I like to listen and try not to say too much. And I have this kind of like a quarterback in the pocket. You know when you've said too much or enough, and you just stop. So you kind of develop that over the years. And there are times when I still say, I talk too much there. It's hardly ever a time when you say you didn't talk enough. So there's different extremes, but that's kind of how I come down on that one.
Yeah. How important is being a good listener in your line of work, especially with, you rattled off some of the names of the guys you've worked with. You've got countless championship winners that are in the booth with you. How important is it for you to develop a good rapport with them and be able to bounce off some of the stuff that they're saying?
I've been lucky that most of the people, men and women that I've worked with for double-digit years now. And so you kind of develop a rhythm that way, and you know their cadence and you know what they're going to say, if they're going to say more or less in certain situations. But you do, I'll give you an example from a basketball game. At one time or another, you may be listening to the producer in your ear with the headset. You may be trying to get a stat from your stat person. You may be getting a sponsorship read from a stage manager. And at the same time, you're listening to what your analyst is saying. So you're comprehending all of that at the same time. And you've got different channels in your head so that when the analyst finishes what they say, you can say something that kind of dovetails with what they've said, something to the effect of, wow, if the analyst says, wow, Syracuse is really shooting the lights out. Well, that's a cue to me to come in with, hey, Mike Jaminski, they're 52% this half right now. And that's all you need. That's it. And then we go back into the game or something. But just to do that one little thing, I've got to get that 52% from the stat person. I've got to listen to the producer saying we're going to this replay or we're going to this shot. I want my directors to talk to me too. And a lot of times they'll talk to me as well. I tell them. And the stage manager may have something. So there's a lot, in other words, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of channels that you have to filter. And with all that happening, perhaps the most important thing besides listening to the producer is probably listening to your analyst and trying to make it a coherent conversation.
How important, or what are some of the things that you like to do to kind of break the ice when you get a new analyst and when you're trying to kind of get to know them and get them involved a little bit more in the game?
So in that instance, it's more of, before the game, I'll kind of get a little handle on what they want to stress in that game. And then there's more of, I like to call it a tee up. We put the ball right on the tee for them and just say, hey, what makes that Syracuse, did I use another Syracuse example? What makes that Syracuse 2-3 zone effective or whatever? So, but if I'm working with Dan Bonner or Debbie Antonelli or Mike Jaminski or Brian Oliver or Corey Alexander, and I hate if I missed anybody, but I don't need to really give it that sort of nudge. I can just say something a certain way and they know exactly what I'm trying to do. So there's that slight variation, but most of the time, the people that I work with are so professional and knowledgeable, it's very, very easy to do.
I want to loop back to the beginning of your career because you've kind of had a very interesting path. You started out in local TV and then you kind of bounce around a little bit and eventually ending up with a good little ACC schedule and some golf as well. But when you started out in TV doing local sport, how did you feel like you were kind of trying to map yourself out, saying to yourself, maybe what's the next step? Where's the next job? And how can I get to a major market or get on air at the biggest network?
I think you're always thinking about that when you start, like where you would want to go. But I would caution anybody, because I'm from the Boston area, and I always wanted to go back there and work in affiliate TV as a sports anchor, reporter, what have you. And as I went along in my career, I realized that I wanted to get back into play-by-play because I had started out at a small station in Worcester, Massachusetts, but it had a play-by-play component to it. So I was calling Holy Cross basketball and football on television at my first job, which is just ridiculous. And I knew it at the time, so I wanted to make the most of that. And so I got to call football, basketball, college hockey, high school basketball, that kind of stuff. And then kind of went away from that with the TV affiliate stuff, the anchoring and that kind of thing. But I knew I wanted to get back to play-by-play. And so I was lucky enough to come across an opportunity that involved some of that down in Charlotte at a network, a regional sports network. And that kind of morphed into working for the Southern Conference and working for Fox Sports in Atlanta, and then into the ACC product and working for Raycom Sports. So it all kind of developed that way. And for Raycom, I started hosting their pregame show for ACC football, and then Tim Brandt retired, and I was lucky enough to get Tim's spot. And there's another person, I don't mean to name drop, but there's another person who I owe a lot to, and there's a million people out there. I could list names for 2 hours more. So, but it was just that kind of that progression. So the moral of the story is I never ended up back in Boston doing what I initially wanted to do, but it took me a little while to figure out this is what I wanted to do. So don't be so totally hard and fast focused on one thing. Like we talked about before, versatility and being able to do different things. And there were some elements about affiliate television that I wasn't super keen with. So I wanted to see if I could take a different route. I may have stayed in that, but luckily I found something down here in the Charlotte area and it worked out, and here we are.
You kind of talked about it a little bit in that answer, but how important was networking and still is to this day for you?
I was about to say I got one job without networking, but there was networking involved in that one too. And I've had probably, I don't know, 10, 20 different places where I've worked. Newsrooms, regional sports, pretty much all over the Atlantic coast, up and down the Atlantic coast into the Midwest. So it's very, very important. And to have someone who can at least vouch for you, and you never know who's watching or listening. So you should always, it's hard to do on a consistent basis, but you should always strive for your best, just because you just don't know. Like, I think it was Joe DiMaggio who said, like, you know, he plays like his hair's on fire all the time because the person in the stands might be the one and only game they ever go to. So he wanted to play his very best. And I think Ted Williams is probably the same way too, to use some historical references. But you should feel that way when you're working, because you just don't know who's watching. I'll give you a great example. I was working in Worcester way, way back, and somebody asked me, said, "Do you want to host the giveaway in between periods in a Bruins preseason game?" They were playing in Worcester, and I was like, "Sure." They're going to give me, I don't know, $50, whatever it was. I didn't care, and I went and did. It was one of those, try to shoot the puck into the little square from center ice, and so I emceed that, whatever. And I got a call the next day from the producer of the Boston Bruins pregame show, which was on TV 38, which at the time had Red Sox and Bruins, and Sean McDonough was the longtime Red Sox voice. Fred Cusick was the longtime Bruins voice. Look his name up if you don't know that name. And the producer said to me, "Hey, I like what you did with that intermission hosting. Can you send me some stuff? Because we're looking for a host for the Boston Bruins pregame show," which at the time, Aiden, was the thing that I wanted to do. And it came out of left field. So
Wow.
I didn't end up doing it. In fact, a very good friend of mine got the job ahead of me. But the point is, even when you think that nothing, you think this is not worth my time, or this is not whatever, you just don't know. So anything can happen. I haven't told that story in a really long time. So, but it was great. I couldn't believe who was on the other line when he called. Back then, there were no texts. There wasn't even email. So you had to pick up the phone and call somebody, and it would ring. It would make a ringing sound.
How did you network in the days before email and texting? Because now it's pretty easy to find somebody's email. How in the world, I never even thought of that before, but how did you network in the days pre-internet, pre-texting, pre-email, pre-everything?
You had to psych yourself up to call somebody. That was it. You just had to call them. I remember I wanted to work for the Golf Channel really badly, and they were starting in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been given a guy's name from a friend of mine at a golf club near Worcester. And a lot of stuff goes back that way because, at the beginning, you're trying all kinds of different things. And I happened to be working at that station in Worcester. And he said, "Try this guy." And the guy was like the executive producer of the Golf Channel. Like, he had no reason to pick up the phone. Of course, there's no caller ID. Your phone rings. It's on your desk. You're like, okay, we'll pick it up. So I did get to talk to him. And I didn't end up getting a job, but at least I got to send him a resume and a resume tape. And who knows who might have seen that way back in the day. And we physically had to send tapes. like a VHS tape. Pick up the phone. So.
I mean, those connections, just incredible how hard they must have been to get back then. It's pretty easy to find somebody's email through LinkedIn or wherever right now, but that must have been incredible back in the day. Who else were some of the guys that you looked up to in the industry growing up, and once you started networking and trying to get a job, who were the guys that you felt most comfortable sending a tape to and getting some good advice from?
So when I first started in play-by-play, I mentioned Fred Cusick, and Fred is no longer with us, but he did Bruins games for over 40 years. And I mean, the stories he told me, there was a couple of occasions where we had a nice, just sit down talk kind of thing. And he invited me to a couple of Bruins games, because when I got the assignment to call a college hockey game, I asked if I could come observe him and just see what his pregame routine was. And, you know, I'd listened to him do games for years and years on a little black and white TV with a screen about this big. So Fred was so kind to allow me to just follow him, and gave me a lot of some of the stuff I told you today was right from his mouth. And when I say that he went through incredible lengths to get Bruins games on the air, some of the stories he told me about driving physical tapes, like big tapes and film canisters, from Montreal to Boston so the game could play the next, stuff like that. It's mind blowing. It really is. And I got to meet Johnny Most, who was also the radio voice of the Boston Celtics for many, many years. And he was known for his high pitched, gravelly kind of voice. And he was the voice of the Celtics of Cousy and Heinsohn and Bill Russell and Dave Cowens. And I mean, the list goes on, but all, you know, all that. And, so John Havlicek, that's his most famous call, is Havlicek stealing the ball, obviously. So those guys were incredible. And just to know that I could meet those people and just get knowledge from them, just amazing. And then Sean McDonough was so nice to me because I met him at a class. He spoke to my class. I was part of the first sports broadcasting class to go through Syracuse. And our professor knew Sean, and he had him speak to our class. And afterwards, Sean gave me a name of somebody at Nesson, and that's how kind of that ball got rolling. And I'm not kidding. To this day, I could pick up the phone and ask him. In fact, we spoke recently about basketball. What comes to mind is from football season. He did it was a Florida State game he had done the week before, and I was doing the week of. And I said, can I call you and just get some insight on what you saw? No problem. So stuff like that is just invaluable. And I hope that I can do that to whoever wants me to in the future, because you got to keep it going. And play-by-play is tough because it's a tough racket, as everybody finds out. And so I feel fortunate to be where I am, but to have people who will help you along the way, because at times, you know, down the road, you could be competing for the same thing. So it's just, it's a very challenging business. I'll put it that way. And I've been lucky enough to be in the ACC for almost 15 years now. And before that, the Southern Conference, and before that, the Patriot League, and everybody's been fantastic. So it's been incredible. I hope it continues. So, and the folks on the PGA Tour as well. They've been great. And the Big Ten. All those people been fantastic.
It's interesting you brought up golf, because that's kind of where I wanted to go next. We've never had a golf guy on the podcast, though maybe once or twice, but not a guy that would be doing as big of a golf schedule as you do. I mean, you do it, and also no one who's ever done golf on the radio. How do you do golf on the radio? What are the strategies and tips that you would give somebody for doing the ever so popular sport of golf on the radio?
People ask me about it. By the way, you just sounded like Tim Brando. You said, "How do you do?" Just like that, like Tim does. And Tim is, by the way, Tim is a great friend too.
Tim's been on the podcast, 15 episodes ago, I think.
Yeah, we worked the ACC tournament together for several years in a row, and he's another guy who I'm lucky enough, and I hate to sound name droppy, but I could pick up the phone, and Tim is very, very helpful. But the golf is exactly what you think it would be. I mean, you go out and kind of describe what you see. You really have to like the game. Our shifts are 6, sometimes 7 or 8 hours of golf. And on a Friday, when you're chasing down lesser known players who are trying to make the cut on a Friday afternoon, it can get lengthy, but you never know what you'll see out there. I was lucky enough to call a 59 a couple of years ago when Brant Snedeker won the Wyndham Championship in Greensboro, North Carolina. And so that was at Sedgefield Country Club. So that was fun. It was the first round, I think. Yeah. And he holed out a shot coming in. He was playing the front nine second because, you know, you play opposite nines each day. And he holed out a shot on the 6th hole that I just got there and saw it drop. So then we followed him the rest of the way, and he made about a 15-footer on the last hole to shoot 59. But I've been lucky. I was more recently, John Rahm made a putt in Chicago at a tournament there of about 66 feet. And I got to call that. And before that, Dustin Johnson had made a putt on the last hole to get into a playoff with Rahm. And then Rahm made the 66-footer. I called a Phil Mickelson Tiger Woods duel at Pebble Beach. I mean, it's just, you just don't know what you're going to run. And it's not predetermined as to who will end up with the winners, that kind of thing. It just depends on how the tournament develops. But it's so much fun, and the PGA Tour treats us so well, and the professionals on tour treat us so well. And that was really the one time I picked up the phone. I heard it on Sirius Radio in my car 10 years ago. And that was the one time I just kind of picked up the phone and just started making calls. But ultimately, it was somebody that I sort of knew. So it was still a networking thing. And then my first assignment was at Pebble Beach 10 years ago. So
for those that don't know, what does your setup look like for golf? Are you in a studio like, say, Jim Nantz when they're doing the Masters and he's kind of cutting between holes? Are you out on the course following these guys around? What is your schedule?
The way it works is they give you a golf cart and they give you a battery pack and a headset. It's all, you know, a microphone. It's all connected somehow. I don't know how they do it, but it's amazing. The technology is amazing in its simplicity. We just put this pack on and we're ready to go. And you drive around the course and our producer will tell us, hey, go over to 17. Rory's got a birdie putt there. And you just run all over the course. And part of the skill is really knowing how to get around the course in a golf cart. And when they were fans, it's a lot harder to do. So, and especially if Tiger Woods is in the event, that's a whole nother level. And we certainly, you know, in light of the recent events, it's just mind blowing. And we're just all happy he's still alive. Golf is way down the list as far as things are concerned. But I got to cover Tiger a little bit and call some of his golf, and that's been exciting. The crowds are amazing. The galleries. My favorite event is here in Charlotte. We have the Wells Fargo Championship, and Tiger won that a few years ago, and I happened to witness that. And I've seen a lot of incredible things. I'll just put it that way. But yeah, we just run out and follow them and kind of just say what you see and describe it exactly how you see it, and things that people just, you know, you're it. That's it. The only way they can visualize what's out there is the way you describe it. So it's a lot of fun to try to connect some words that make sense and can paint a picture for people.
When people think of the proverbial golf announcer stereotype, it's very quiet, very subdued, and they're whispering.
Oh yeah.
How do you change your voice inflection between that and, say, an 6 overtime football game? How does that add up, and how do you manage your voice inflection when you're usually able to kind of really get into it and get with the crowd? You can't really do that in golf.
They're two totally different animals, and with golf, it's very low and controlled to start with, but once the ball leaves the club face, anything is fair game. So especially when we had the crowds out there. It's just a little stranger now without them, and it's actually harder because there's absolutely no sound buffer. So at least if you got the murmur of the crowd, even when the player isn't hitting the ball, you can talk at a certain level. But that's another strategic thing, is how far away do you need to be so they don't hear you, because the absolute worst thing is you don't want a player looking in your direction prior to hitting the ball and distracting that person. But once the ball leaves the club face, I mean, I've lost my mind out there a couple times in a good way. It's just exciting. It's theater. Golf is theater. So in those moments where you get to kind of really pack a lot of emotion into something that's still coherent and understandable, but at the same time, you're at the very top of your level as far as excitement is concerned. With everything else, again, we don't have any crowds this year or fans, but it's not like I see a guy at the free throw line. He looks over at me like, "Hey, can you be quiet while I take these free throws?" So, and we're not even close to the court anymore. So it works out fine. That's easy. The golf is definitely, you got to do it for a while to figure out the proxemics of it. But once you get that down and you got that figured out, you're in good shape. So it's a lot of fun. It's really just a lot of fun. As long as you've done your proper work to prepare, and you can tell a guy by his swing out in the fairway already, and by his mannerisms and the clothes he wears. It's great when there's one left-hander and two right-handers, because that's very easy to figure out. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun.
I've gotten those looks a little bit this year, maybe not in past years, but when we're doing high school games for the first 2 weeks of the season, we had fans in the gym and I was the only one there. And it was deadly silent when they were shooting free throws. And I was doing my best golf impression when they're going to the line, still do with the limited capacity, but I've definitely gotten those looks. What does it look like? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
What does it look like with your prep? I'm sure we can all kind of tell what the prep looks like for a football or basketball game. What does prep look like for golf?
That's a little harder, and because what happens is you get an idea of who you're going to follow, so you make a few notes here and there. But the cool thing about the group that I work with on the golf side is that everybody brings a little different angle to it. Some guys go for the more descriptive stuff. Some guys work in more stats. Some guys talk about certain things more and some less. So it all kind of complements one another. I would categorize myself as maybe the less statistical and more observational about what's going on. Like I like to describe the divot, like what it looks like. Because if you've ever played golf, you know that when you hit it properly and you have a proper dollar bill sized divot, you've hit a good shot. So I've actually said on the air, dollar bill sized divot, because to somebody who plays golf, that means that guy just hit a really good, he hit it the way he wanted to. And so I like to describe that stuff, the wind, the level of the stance. I like to really get into the things that are going to affect the shot. And then, what kind of putt the guy would be left with. You need to orient the viewer, in other words, because they've got nothing. They don't know where the hole is. They don't know where the bunkers are. They don't, if a guy goes in a bunker, is it deep? Is it shallow? Is he far away? Is he close? There's a million things. And our producers do a great job of telling us the distances that the players are from the hole, and sometimes what club they have as well. So, because we are ahead, we're always one step ahead of the players. I can't look over at the caddy and get an indication because the caddy's 200 yards away. So, because we're up at the green most of the time. But so the prep is really, it's a couple nuggets about the guys you're following and some of the metrics that are out there with the PGA Tour now: strokes gained putting, strokes gained from the tee. There's all kinds of stuff. You can find anything. But really, you could be assigned 3 players and never see them the whole tournament, just because of the way things develop. Somebody's going low, a lesser known player. And then you get on your phone, you go to the PGA Tour app, and you can look at the scorecard on there, and you can look at some bio information. And maybe you drop in where he went to school, and if he's won an amateur event or a professional event on the various other tours. But most of the time, it's more about the description. That's just for me. Now, there's other guys who love to crunch the numbers, and they do an amazing job of that. So I think the way we complement one another is really the way that works. If you've ever listened to our broadcast, it's amazing. And if you knew the layers that go into it, it's just incredible. And I'm just happy to be part of that group.
Is it odd because you're basically out on the course and you're waiting for whoever the host is to throw it to you? Is it odd sitting around waiting to see, okay, now we're coming to you in 5 seconds? Is that odd at all for you?
I don't think anymore, because we know what we're going to get. Like, if the analyst is finishing up a thought and I can tell we're going to be pretty tight to contact, I'll adjust accordingly. We'll pick up the shot right away, and then any sort of substance will come around afterward. Unless it's a highlight, unless he makes something and he goes into the lead or whatever the circumstance may be. But you can always add your embellishment or framing. You can do it afterward. It's totally fine. If he was going for, just an example's sake, if he was putting for birdie and we picked it up right at the putt and then he makes it, you would call the birdie, and now I can go back around and say, hey, that's his 3rd birdie in his last 4 holes. Maybe that's something I would have said at the beginning had I had the time leading up to the shot. So you're constantly making mental edits all the time. And I'll just share one thing with you. Technically, the way we have to do it sometimes, since there's so much going on, you have to record calls. Although the production value, you would never know, because our producers and production people do such a wonderful job. But there are times when you'll start a call that's being recorded, and then they'll play it live so you can hear what you just said as you're finishing the existing call. So the call is chasing you down the line. Live call. So you're listening to what you just said and you're finishing what you're about to say at the same time. Now that takes a little getting used to. But technically, it comes off flawlessly every time because of the production people we have. So that's just an example.
I want to finish up and don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I want to finish up with kind of something not really related to this, but the team stream with Final Four that you've been doing. I mean, those are so interesting to me as somebody who has been a part of some of those alternate feed broadcasts. What goes into one of the stream games that you normally wouldn't do for any other game?
Well, first of all, there's very little prep for the team that you're not calling the game specifically for. So the first time I did that was 2015 in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Stadium. And I was calling Duke and Wisconsin. I'm sorry. They met in the finals. Mm-hmm. I was calling Duke and Michigan State in the semifinals. And so the whole broadcast was I did it with Ala Abdelnaby, who is now the analyst for the 76ers and played at Duke. And so the whole broadcast was just all Duke. So, which was great because I had done a couple of their games during the course of the regular season for our ACC product for Raycom and Fox. And so that worked out great. But in a normal broadcast, what I strive for, and no fan will ever agree with this, depending on what team they follow, but you're always striving for 50-50 right down the middle. And if somebody does something extraordinarily well, they deserve to be complimented in play-by-play form. But sometimes the other team doesn't appreciate that. So, but that's a whole nother thing. I think a lot of people feel that way. Sometimes I feel that way about games. So, you go for the 50-50. With the team streams, I did Duke in 2015 in the national semis, and then I did Syracuse against North Carolina in the national semifinals the following year, and that was in Houston, Texas. And so The whole broadcast. Now, I was a little more attached to the Syracuse broadcast because I had gone to school there, and I legitimately wanted them to win the game. Now, I wanted Duke to win too because of the nature of what we were doing, but the Syracuse thing was a little different because, I'm invested in it. Now, when I call a Syracuse game for an ACC broadcast, that's a 50-50 proposition. That's my goal. And I've even been accused of going the other way and pulling for the team that Syracuse is playing. So you get all kinds of different things. But for those broadcasts, it was just straight, hey, Duke and Syracuse. And I tried to put out as much information about those teams as I possibly could. And they're Hall of Fame coaches too. So.
Before I get into the last 3 questions that I ask everybody, I want to ask you about acting. That's something that I don't think we've ever had other than maybe an extra on the podcast before. How did you get into
No, I'm a real actor, Aiden. I get residual checks.
I looked you up. You have a page on IMDb. I mean, you're practically a celebrity at this point.
They're only for like 12 cents now because I did the shows so many years ago. But yes, I got into that a little bit and still do some of that. And most of the time, I only got the job because they wanted an authentic reporter, and I was the closest thing. Or a sports anchor or whatever. But that pressure is unbelievable because you're just a day player and you got to get it right and get the hell out of the way so you don't delay production at all. So the pressure there is 100 times what we normally do. But that's a lot of fun, and I enjoyed that. I've gotten to work on some movies, some TV shows. I was as close to a repeat player on a show as you could be. I was on one show 6 times.
Wow.
And I did, the first show I ever did was called One Tree Hill. And because they replay those shows, I've gotten people like, they do a double take, like, what? I thought I saw you on One Tree. This was back in 2008. I did that. And I still get residual checks. That's not a lie to this day.
Wow.
For being on one episode of One Tree Hill. So, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And yeah. When at the outset, yes, the residuals are great. But once the time goes along, they diminish considerably. But it's I just kind of stumbled into it and just got lucky again. So.
To kind of
that was
relate
basically
it back,
how that worked.
To kind of relate it back to broadcasting, did it kind of help you in your on-air presence, because it's a performance, and a lot of people would say the role of a broadcaster is to entertain or perform very much like an actor.
So here's the difference. I feel that play-by-play has a huge amount of skillful ad-lib nature to it. Very little is scripted. And that's why you have to be prepared for like anything that might happen. So my notes are pretty copious, and you may use 20%, depending on the game. With the acting side of it, somebody worked very hard to write the words that you're going to say. And you better say them exactly how they wrote them, or they will tell you. And I speak from experience on that. And there have been times when I've been in a reporter's role thinking, I would never say this. But it's not my domain. Somebody wrote this for me, so I say it. But so that's really how that's the biggest difference is that. And then the most skillful play-by-play people say things off the top of their head, and it sounds like they've rehearsed them for hours. And you know the people I'm talking about. And hopefully every once in a while I hit that mark too. But the people who can make it sound conversational and come up with clever ideas and weave everything together in a play-by-play setting, it's an amazing talent. And people who watch it on TV would not notice unless it's done improperly. Otherwise, they just accept it as the standard. And we all know that there's a lot that goes into it.
Final 3 questions that I ask everybody. Who's a broadcaster you've always wanted to meet, dead or alive?
Oh my gosh. Well, Jim Mckay. So Jim Mckay was the voice of the Olympics for ABC and US Open and British Open golf championships. And I worked in Pennsylvania, which is kind of near, he's a Maryland guy. So his influence is everywhere in that area. And I never got to meet him, but I've heard many stories from people that I work with about him and what an amazing person he was. And Wide World of Sports obviously was if people don't know about him, you should look him up, because the guy was just amazing. So he would be the guy I would like to meet.
What has been your favorite stadium or arena to broadcast from?
Well, I mean, outside of the Carrier Dome,
Home field advantage.
because
there.
as a student there, your fantasy, your dream is like, how do I get back here and call a game? Other than when you're a student working for the student radio station. Right. And a few years ago, I got to call a basketball game, and I remember it vividly. It was Loyola of Maryland against Syracuse, and that was the first time I got to call a Syracuse game. It was probably 10 years ago now. And now with Syracuse joining the ACC, I get to go to the arena. I get to go to the Dome all the time. When I say all the time, it's like, 4 to 8 trips a year. Wow. So very lucky in that regard. And in fact, last year, actually, it's a couple of years ago, we did a double overtime game, Syracuse and North Carolina, and we did a game at the end of last season, not the one we just had, where the Syracuse defensive back pried the ball away from a Wake Forest receiver, ran it back in overtime for the win. Syracuse scored 9 points in overtime to win the game against Wake Forest. And so that was kind of exciting. So there's been those moments, but it's always great to go back to the Carrier Dome. Outside of the Dome, oh man, a place where I'd like to go or I have been already?
Either one.
Well, I guess I'd like to do a game at Fenway Park. Be it a hockey game or whatever they want to do in there. That would probably be, because I have childhood memories of going to Fenway Park and watching the games. So to be able to broadcast the game from there. And I worked in Boston for a while, so I got to go to Fenway Park, but in a professional reporting capacity and not necessarily a play-by-play capacity. So I would have to say Fenway Park. And the old Boston Garden, where I got to sit with Fred Cusick and watch it.
What advice do you have to kids who want to get into the industry?
Did you understand?
What advice do you have to kids that want to get into the industry?
So be very open-minded. And like I said before, be versatile. And try to take a little bit from every person that you get a chance to speak to. And you have to really be flexible and know that you're going to fail a lot more than you're going to succeed. And that's going to happen for many, many years. And don't have a plan B if you really want to do it. Just keep moving forward. Learn from your mistakes, because you'll make, I probably made one during this interview for all I know. But just try to be your best and considerate to other people in the business, because everybody's working tremendously hard, especially these days, to just get things on TV at all, or on radio, or whatever medium you want to select. So it's much easier to be kind, and that will be repaid back to you. I guarantee you that.
If people want to find you online and say hello, where can they do that?
Probably Twitter is the easiest thing. Just at TWERME on Twitter.
Simple enough. Tom, thanks so much. And we really appreciate you joining us.
It's my pleasure. Take care and best of luck to you.